Hello, this is Jason Dunne with Sumo Logic. I'm a product marketing manager here at Sumo, and today we will be running through PCI compliance at Sumo Logic and how you can help to improve your PCI compliance posture. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen in just a moment here, and then we can kind of dive right in. Just give me one moment while I share screen. Excellent. So I'm going to go ahead and just dive right in here. So, as I mentioned, we're gonna chat through the ways in which you can go about using Sumo Logic as a platform to actually improve your PCI compliance posture. So the way in which we do that is we think about it as a set of challenges that are looking to be addressed. So firstly, the common challenges that we often see with our customers is this focus on situations will arise where you essentially won't have the full cloud support that you would have anticipated. So you may have scenarios where the current approach just doesn't scale to handle these various cloud workloads that you're bringing into your system. You're also going to see scenarios where there's these really slow cycles to PCI readiness. So it's this really time-consuming product deployment and tuning that's required around PCI. Thirdly, there's the complexity challenge of, complexity solutions that complex solutions that really require this steep learning curve to get off and running quickly. And oftentimes, achieving PCI compliance can be a very expensive undertaking, having to utilize tools with really fixed licensing requirements that don't always align directly with your business needs. In a lot of situations, you'll see that these challenges will arise. Our solution at Sumo Logic is a cloud-native data monitoring tool. It's really focused on allowing you to really, retain and analyze the information that is most relevant to you. And it really enables the cost-effective, rapid PCI readiness for all of your cloud as well as on-prem environments. So you can see here in this diagram sort of the types of data that you'd be bringing into Sumo, whether it's database data, firewall data, could be identity access data, as well as, if you're spinning up your own microservices via open source, et cetera, then this is also a consideration of something that you might be interested in bringing into Sumo. So I'm just kind of in the interest of time, we'll kind of shift forward here, but a lot to be said about the various types of data that can be brought in to Sumo, and we'll kind of walk through what that looks like from within the actual live demo environment after just a couple quick slides we'll run through. So yeah, as we kind of covered, there's kind of the challenges piece, and then if we just jump into kind of some of the advantages that react directly to that. So you get the cloud native scalability aspect. So Sumo itself is a SaaS solution that's highly scalable, highly elastic. It essentially is eliminating that need to purchase or manage any additional equipment. It really will enable you to achieve rapid compliance readiness, whether it's with out-of-the-box content or building out your own custom queries, dashboards, alerts, et cetera, to really build, have the ability to generate these pre-built alert reports, as well as ease of use and flexibility. So your team shouldn't have to do a lot of work in order to get onboarded. It should be very seamless. It should be very easy to get off and running. Again, whether that's out of the box or whether you're doing something custom, in both cases, you can get up to speed really quickly. And then fourthly, cost effectiveness. So Sumo offers an affordable kind of tiered licensing model. So this allows you to really split out data into what the right sort of tiers would be according to what your needs are going to be, as well as utilizing the credits model within Sumo, which we won't have time to go into a lot of detail today, but essentially will allow you to really be flexible with how you utilize Sumo as a platform and how you actually go about paying for it as well. So just a quick run through. So probably a lot of folks on today's call are very familiar with the 12 core requirements of PCI. And we'll go into more detail and the length of the demo as we kind of walk through each of the 12. But just to quickly present all 12 here, I think it will help offer a little bit of a kind of framework to run through in the 30 minutes we have today together. So the first piece would be installing and maintaining firewall configuration. Second is, really focus on not using vendor supplied defaults for passwords. Thirdly, as a lot of folks know, protecting stored data is really critical to achieving PCI compliance. Fourth, encryption of transmission of cardholder data. And I'll kind of glance through the rest of the list just because we'll be covering it in more detail as we go. And just I want to make sure we have as much time as we need within the platform and time for Q&A as well. But just a touch on a couple of the core pieces here. A lot of the requirements that really come up where our customers are looking to really think about how to very intelligently and very proactively cover these requirements. And a few of the others would be developing policies, for example, around developing and maintaining secure systems. We would allow you to actually track to those policies and make sure you're covering the need there. Another would be item 10 would be track and monitor all access to network resources. This is kind of a classic use case for a platform like Sumo, as well as regularly testing secure systems, maintaining a policy that addresses the information security needs of your team. So like I said, I didn't go into full detail for each because I think a lot of folks are at least somewhat familiar with the kind of the list of 12 requirements, and we'll have time to go into more detail as we progress here. So yeah, I mean, it's really just backing out for a moment from the PCI compliance piece specifically. You can really think of Sumo, as I mentioned earlier, as this very scalable, proven out service. We have over 2,000 customers that use the platform, 30 million plus searches that are being performed daily. Really just a massive amount of data that's being analyzed, searched against every single day. You can see a few more data points around that. And you'll really be able to achieve that kind of fast time to value and really excellent customer experience on behalf of your customers as well. So with that, I'm going to actually just jump into the live Sumo environment. So we'll start with kind of actually before I dive into the posture overview, which is more of a little bit more of an umbrella, kind of broader look at the overall scope. I'm just going to briefly familiarize you with just Sumo as a platform. So for folks that that haven't used the platform yet, essentially a lot of the kind of magic happens, so to speak, just in this new tab, almost like you were creating a new browser tab. And this is where you can fire up a new log search, also known as a query, right? So, and then you can also perform metric searches. You can search, you can look at traces from within a new tab. Livetail is basically just constantly giving you a feed of what messages are coming into your system. And then it kind of goes down from there. We also do, new dashboard, we'll spend the majority of our time today with dashboards, as well as Explore tab is a way in which you can navigate through pods and clusters within your Kubernetes instances, just as an example. So yeah, it's just a kind of a quick overview. Here you can see kind of the shared content with your teammates, so just easy for collaboration. Then I'm jump into the app catalog really quickly. So this is the out-of-the-box content that you get within Sumo. Essentially what you'll get is, hundreds of out-of-the-box, what we call apps or out-of-the-box dashboards that just really let you kind of get off to the races quickly. You can actually preview the dashboard before downloading it or before adding it to your Sumo instance, I should say. And as well as, assigning what the correct source category is. So what the right data source is that will be assigned to that. So as you can see here, just to briefly touch on, we have a whole section for compliance and security. So just to kind of zoom out from the more PCI focused aspects of this conversation, you can see here that you get essentially any number of types of data sources, whether you need to use Zoom or whether you need to use box data, for example, in order to be able to kind of run through your audit process and provide all the right details. If you just search compliance, you'll get easy access to all of what we'll see today in more detail, whether it's for Palo Alto Networks or Linux. essentially you'll get access to all 12 of the requirements, and they're all just assigned based on which data sources can actually allow you to do that most easily. So yeah, so essentially what we'll do is we'll start with the overview, and then we'll go to requirement 1 and just successfully work towards 12. So the PCI posture overview is going to give us that overall lens into which requirements essentially you're seeing the most failures popping up in. In this panel here, we can see that requirement 6 is an area of interest. There's clearly quite a few failures that are occurring that likely will need to be acted on, and that means that probably there are some significant improvements that need to be made as far as making sure that requirement 6 is being fully addressed. And then, we get this overall view into just the number of incidents period that need to be also considered in the process. And then here we can see there's many different visualizations that you can have within a Sumo dashboard. In this case, we get a stacked set of requirements. So we can see that, the color pink is responsible for kind of the lion's share of the failures that are occurring over this more historical time period. Requirement 2, basically in this case, would be an area of interest, clearly something you'd want to dive into, and then kind of like zoom into the more specific dashboard and try to understand better why those posture requirements or posture improvements need to be made and how to actually navigate that. This is kind of the more umbrella view into all requirements altogether. Then we'll jump into requirement 1. So this is all about installing and maintaining firewall configuration. So we can take a closer look. You can actually drill down into the individual queries. In this case, we can see that Palo Alto Networks is the data source that's being referenced. So if we go back to requirement 1, we can see, these visualizations will help to better understand what denied traffic over time might look like. We see this spike that occurred around 10:20 in the morning, possibly something you'd want to drill down into from within a query. But then you also get a look at the, kind of the other side of the lens would be allowed network traffic, network activity by transport and internet layer protocol. And then it's actually broken down by TCP versus UDP. Here we can see that UDP is responsible for the lion's share of the allowed network activity over time. So this is kind of a lens into the kind of, this is an example of how Palo Alto network data can be brought in and how that can kind of inform the process. The additional step would be to kind of, like I said, drill into these things, drill into these specific queries that are underpinning them. And this is a little bit just familiarity with the Sumo platform as well. We can also do a save as schedule search. That will actually help us to generate an alert. So if we want to run this, for example, in real time, we can say every time that we get greater than, say, 5 results that come in, then we would want to send an email on every single time that we surpass that threshold. And that's kind of how you can quickly generate alerts around these and be able to, as we say, you don't necessarily need to live in the dashboards. It may be that you just need to wait on an alert to occur and then react to that accordingly. So yeah, so the next piece would be requirement 2. So just jumping ahead, it's really focused on, not using vendor supplied defaults for various passwords. So here we want to look more closely at, Linux data in particular, and we're going to say, what are the failed logins that are occurring? What are the successful logins? How does that inform password usage and just the kind of access and authentication into Linux OS data in particular in this scenario? So just kind of one little different way of looking at it is a very straightforward table. So not necessarily as graphically compelling probably, but it is very factual, straightforward, and something that we could build a visualization around if we want to kind of go a little bit deeper on that front. Requirement 4, so I'm kind of skipping over, we can actually just jump back to the requirements. So requirement 3 is all about protection of stored data. Won't necessarily cover this in the scope of today's call, but Sumo has a very specific process for how we encrypt data, and also we're more than happy to provide documentation around what our various processes are, for how we handle customer data, or in the case of a partner of ours, how we can handle your customer's data on your behalf, for example. So something we can certainly talk through in more detail if that's something you're interested in. So the next piece I'll jump ahead to is requirement 4. So this is all about, again, kind of dovetailing with the encryption conversation. This is about encryption of the transmission of cardholder data in particular. So in this instance, we're looking at insecure allowed traffic by target port. So we can see this bigger spike on destination port 80. Looks like a lot of it is coming in through TCP on these 2 to 3 specific IPs. So just kind of a way that we can kind of like run through that analysis and go a little bit deeper. We can also see here, probably of some concern in this lab data, we're seeing unencrypted default port for some of these network activity, so some of the traffic that's being passed through. So probably an area of focus that requires some attention and something that we'd want to actually dig into a little bit deeper. It's actually a pretty significant volume that should probably be addressed. Now, of course, it may be valid. There may be valid reasons for the lack of encryption, but still something that would require some attention on that front. Jumping ahead to requirement 5 would be, this is really focused on protection against all systems against malware and updating these various pieces of anti-malware software. So what we're doing here is we're actually totaling up the number of apps that are currently affected, how many users are attached to each of those apps. And then we're saying how many, we're going more granular from there and saying how many files are actually being infected, what types of malware are we seeing, what is the actual activity type that's attached to each of those. So it can be pretty informative for better understanding how malware needs to be better addressed. And then requirement 5 would also connect up with, this is more of a look at kind of an antivirus perspective of saying, what is the severity over time? You again see these stacked bar charts, and then you can very easily drill into what might be an area of attention. We can also see here, it's probably a good place to just pause of like the formatting and the visualization of the data. We do have the outlier operator just to kind of zoom in on the query itself, which in this case, we're doing an outlier by count specifically. This pink triangle will represent how it's crossing a given threshold within that time slice. And we're saying within this time slice, we didn't expect to see this outlier to occur. And so that might be something that you would, just as an example, alert on. And then that alert can then bring you back into the dashboard and you say, I see this events outlier. What other kinds of events were occurring around the same time period, around 10:45 in the morning? We can actually start to cross or sort of triangulate against what we see on other charts like severity over time. We can see that severity 2 was pretty significant. Severity 3 was also pretty significant around that same time period. So you can just start to see how these triangulations occur. You can imagine the flow coming in from an alert based on that outlier and then bringing us back into the dashboard and kind of connecting all the dots from there. Certainly you can go more granular if you want to modify the query to align with what your team's requirements are. Okay, so just jumping ahead. So this is, we can X out of this query. Requirement 6 is really focused on the development and maintaining of secure systems. So, Sumo itself would not necessarily be where you would design your policy per se. You would design your policy in through whatever process makes sense for you. But certainly you would use Sumo to be confident that your policies are being, you're meeting the requirements and expectations of what policies you've actually set out. So in this case, we're looking at, how do we drill into update trends for Windows? And if this were an example of a policy that's set, we need to, if your team has a charter that says we need to be certain that we're updating, Windows on a given cadence for all of our devices for all employees, we would then be, somewhat concerned if we're seeing dark blue popping up here. We're seeing various updated failures. And again, something that we'd probably want to drill into. By the same token, we're not seeing a huge spike necessarily, but we are seeing consistency in these failures and attempts. So something that may be something that is worth addressing, worth talking through, worth thinking through with your team, or just needs to be addressed in an audited environment. Requirement 7 is really focused on restricting access to cardholder data based on business need to know. And what starts to get interesting here is the granularity you can get with the actual user account level. So in this case, we're looking at, as I said, user level data. we're seeing what user accounts are being created. So we want to make sure that there are not any unexpected, especially for a smaller company, you will easily have a pulse on which employees you expect to see coming in the system and what types of processes they should have access to, or what kind of processes they should be triggering. So you can kind of map that to what your own organizational understandings are and see how that aligns with what you're seeing. But you can also go and break this down by running services types, as well as active services. So we can see here, if we just hover over the orange line, which is very clearly showing the lion's share of the data that is being shown within this visualization. And we see that SSHD in particular is responsible for most of the data that is shown in this chart. So this may align with expectations, it may not, but if it's higher than expected, that might be an area of attention. If it's not an area of attention, or if it's aligned with expectations, you might drop down into the next layers below and start to say, okay, well, DH client is something that I also would expect here, or user ad, for example. Oh, I'm a little bit surprised to see this as high as it is. We typically wouldn't be adding as many users. And then you can go back and like chat with a team that's handling provisioning, for example, and see how that aligns with that kind of expectation. You can also see it broken down in a pie chart format here. So it's gonna show us kind of similar to what we just looked at, but it's essentially saying unique services broken down by percentage, and then gives us a little bit more of a way to look through that, as well as system stoppages. So every time a Linux OS is being stopped, this would trigger an event, and then you can kind of react to that to align with what you expect cardholder data to be, how you expect it to be behaving, as well as how you are interested in breaking that down, whether that's by service or system type or user account type. Requirement 8. So this is really about identifying and authenticating access to various system components. So in this case, we're actually looking at the same, this is a repurpose of the same type of data. But again, this is where we can kind of drill down further and kind of modify and align these various queries. In that instance, we can see that we're really breaking these data sources down, and we're saying, okay, well, this destination IP is connecting back to this given PCI requirement, and then you can kind of build around what your team needs are accordingly. And then I'll kind of jump ahead. So since we've already kind of covered in requirement 7 this similar type of data, so you're kind of familiar now with that. Requirement 9 is an interesting one, right? So this is looking at actual physical access to cardholder data. So in this case, we can actually get into the geo mapping capabilities and actually can full screen this, and we can start to do the analysis around where we see kind of these hotspots around the globe. So this would help to better visualize how data is being accessed, in whether it's at a physical point, it could be a virtual point as well. In this case, we're more interested in physical locations. And in this case, we're seeing kind of this hotspot on the East Coast, as we might expect. And if we start to zoom in, we can start to see it's kind of starting to break down between, it looks like, New Jersey, New York City. Yeah, so New York City looks to be like very much a kind of hotspot. So if we're looking at a customer's data that in this case does have an office in that location, that might be as expected. But certainly we've had customers that have seen anomalous behavior here, where they didn't do business in a given country, and that was like an automatic kind of click in their head of, oh, this is something we need to act on. And also build lists around what specific countries should or shouldn't be handled, and then kind of make sure that those are being tracked accordingly. Similarly, we can see this visits by country over time. So we're seeing it broken down by country in this case, and we're seeing that. So if I can go back to where we were. We can see that in this case, United States is still, as we may have surmised from the visual to the left, that the United States is actually responsible for the lion's share of the visits over country. But then we also see a couple of larger components that would point to China being a big area of physical access, et cetera. And then you can also break down by various regions, or obviously get as granular as you might like. Requirement 10 is really thinking through tracking and monitoring of all access to network resources. So here we can see, in this instance, we're actually, as well as cardholder data, just to complete that thought. So here we can actually start to break down by failed API calls, and we can also start to look at console root login failures. This might be of a particular concern if we're worried about how access to these network resources is occurring. And if we see root login failures, that's oftentimes an indicator of kind of failed password attempts, and would likely point to a scenario where we need to kind of address and understand why so many root login failures may be occurring. For a larger organization, this is probably not of too much concern, just a legitimate mistyping of a password. But if it starts to get it to a much larger number, or if you start to see these trend lines showing unexpected behavior, then that can be an area of attention. And then if we jump into requirement 11, so there's a couple things that are kind of unique about how we would address requirement 11 in this example. So regularly testing security systems and processes is the kind of the goal behind this requirement. What we're gonna, the two unique things here are basically we're looking at, this is an example of what we call a new dashboard at Sumo, and this allows you to actually merge in logs as well as metrics. This is not necessarily visualizing it as such, but this is just to familiarize you with the concept of being able to handle both sides at once. The other thing that's a little bit unique is there's a little bit of a dependency here within the search. So if we go into the search, this is kind of built around the expectation that you are using Aqua container data. So that would be kind of a contingency, but certainly if you go into just the app catalog, you can really quickly just fire this up, and you can see through previewing and through just clicking, just actually adding this to your library and assigning the right source category, you'll be able to very quickly get up to speed with understanding how to address requirement 11 to really regularly test out these security systems and processes, and be able to look at which images are failing based on malware type or non-compliant images list that might be of interest with these max severity as being a control. So just one different, well, it's just one kind of way to approach the requirement 11 audit needs around that requirement. And then requirement 12. So we're kind of in the home stretch here in this really quick run through of 1 through 12. So maintaining a policy that addresses information security requirements. So here we can see that this is really looking at the more meta view of policy changes. So we can see recent policy changes based on event ID. So it looks like 4704, 4705 were responsible for a significant amount of policy changes, and how that maps to the set of requirements. And we can kind of track to, based on the S3 bucket policy changes that we're seeing come in, how that actually aligns with these various policy designs, and also track for the changes within this kind of trend line. So yeah, that was a really quick run through. I imagine there would be some follow-up questions around this, but with that, I just want to say a quick thank you to all the folks that have joined for today, and absolutely feel free to visit sumologic.com/sign-up in order to kind of just get off and running. I think if there's anything that hopefully you were able to learn today, it's that you can really get up to speed quickly with just very straightforward out of the box content, and then kind of be able to customize that content based on what your 12 requirements are. So with that, I'll pause briefly to see if anyone has any questions that you wanted to kind of chat through. And yeah, so I'll just pause there for a few seconds. Cool. So it looks like a little bit of a quieter bunch today, which is totally fine. But just for folks that want to dig in a little bit deeper, we've also dropped in a link to the PCI compliance app, which is kind of the more meta view into PCI compliance requirements that we kind of started the call with today. And that will really give you a quick run through of what's available and a quick summary and overview of what was covered today if you want to share with additional teammates. And kind of a more condensed form is also available, just like a very quick run through. So with that, it looks like we're up against time. I'm going to go ahead and stop screen sharing. And I'll give it another 30 seconds if anyone wants to chime in with a quick question. We're more than happy to do so. But for now, I'll just go on mute for another 30 seconds or so, and then we can kind of close things out from there. Thank you. Okay, so thanks so much for joining today, and feel free to visit any of the links that are listed in the chat window, and hope to see you on tomorrow's webinar as well. Have a good one.